At the time of recording, the Terra raid event for Chesnaught should still be going on, and we know that inevitably means it's going to show up in competitive play at some point. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. We will take a look at its stats, moves, all that stuff, and see how well it might fit into VGC. So starting with typing, we have Grass Fighting, which has a fairly good offensive spread. It does hit a lot of things super effective. However, this combination does not hit flying, poison, or bug well, which it's not common for dual stab to have the same resisted spread on 3 typings. And that really hurts the amount of Pokemon that this typing can hit neutrally effective, but still 7 super effectives is not bad at all. Now defensively, we have the dreaded flying type 4X, which means you don't want to see Talonflame ever. And there's also 5 typings that are a 2 times super effective on this dual type. You do, however, have 6 resists, so there's some good with some bad, and it does allow this typing to be quite useful in certain matchups, but other matchups it's going to get blown apart. Unfortunately for Chesnaught, Ice and Fairy are 2 typings that you will run into quite a lot. So I would highly recommend a defensive Terra of some sort. Steel actually looks pretty good and covers most of this, with the exception of Fire, but you could also just go for the safe option, which is Water, and Fire would also be a pretty good typing to go for. For abilities, we have the starter special, which the grass types get Overgrow to boost the power of grass type moves when you're below a third of your max health. The hidden ability is interesting. It's bulletproof, which can be helpful in select matchups. As you can see, it's kind of an odd list that just covers some weird moves and also moves that make a lot of sense. So you do get immunity to things like Pollen Puff and Shadow Ball, which is nice. Zap Cannon, interesting. You're not resisting moves that are a huge threat to this Pokemon. That's kind of the issue. It's a good ability for a read when you expect, say, a Shadow Ball to go into that slot, or even a Sludge Bomb. Actually, blocking Sludge Bomb is pretty good for this Pokemon. But if you predict one of these 2 moves to go into that slot, you can switch Chesnaught in, and it will not take damage from the hit. So you basically can waste your opponent's turn if you use this ability correctly. Now the stat distribution is physically defensive, and this starter has one of the more optimal offensive spreads. The special attack is only 74, which typically the secondary offensive stat is somewhere around in the 80s. So we have a pretty reasonable 107 base physical attack with a very nice defensive stat as well. This Pokemon is a bit on the slow side, but it's not super slow. It is faster than Iron Hands though, which could be helpful. And the hit point stat is enough that you can make this pretty physically defensive. Special defense is not super great though, so you do have to keep that in mind. Now, Spiky Shield used to be a signature move for this Pokemon, but there are other Pokemon that have this now. It's just a better version of Protect that will damage any attacker that makes physical contact, which it's definitely something you would run. If you plan to run a Protect move, this is the one you would go for. As for offense, on the grass side, we have Seed Bomb and Wood Hammer, but you do also get access to Bullet Seed and some of the good special attacks, but the special attack stat on this Pokemon is kind of low, so you probably would not run those. And for fighting type moves, we have Close Combat. You don't really need another fighting type move outside of that, but it does also get Brick Break as well as Hammer Arm. And some of these supportive moves, it gets access to Feint and Pain Split, which that is interesting. It gets access to 1 screen in the form of Reflect. It also gets Taunt and Swords Dance. It gets a couple buffing moves, which I'll talk about later. It does have an Arena Trap in the form of Spikes. You also get Helping Hand, and egg moves are where you get to some of the fun moves like Wide Guard and Quick Guard, both of which are great options to have. A Belly Drum, not really a great option, but it is funny that it does get access to that. Super Fang is great for a supportive Pokemon, and Synthesis, so it does have a heal move. And I guess Curse if you really want to run that on this. I guess it synergizes well with that, but I could think of a better option for this Pokemon. I accidentally glanced over Drain Punch. And as for coverage, this Pokemon gets a lot of moves. It's a starter, so you get things like Dragon Claw, Poison Jab, Stomping Tantrum, Rock Slide, Thunder Punch even, Zen Headbutt, Shadow Claw, Aerial Ace, Iron Head, Crunch. So this Pokemon has a lot of coverage to work with, and it definitely doesn't have any shortage of attacking moves. It can hit just about anything. Super effective with the coverage spread this Pokemon has. But I intentionally glanced over this because I want to draw specific attention to this Pokemon's new gimmick. As far as I know, it is the only Pokemon that is a fighting type that gets Iron Defense and Body Press. So you can run Stab Body Press on this in an Iron Defense build. Having access to the combination of Stab Body Press and Iron Defense while also having a good physical defense stat, a heal move like Leech Seed, and a strong protect move in the form of Spiky Shield, this could be the new Iron Defense Body Press build that everyone's been waiting for, where you finally get Stab Body Press and you don't have to use Fighting Terra type to get it. That way you could just run a defensive Terra type and be done with it. Which, now thinking about it, I think Ghost would be a good defensive Terra type for this if you do intend to run that build, which I think the main reason you would run this Pokemon is to run that Body Press build. Because if you want to use a grass fighting type for high amounts of offense outside of buffing moves, you would just use Brillo for that, because its Mach Punch hits like a truck, as well as its Bullet Seed. And it gets access to Spore. So if you intend to use Chesnaught, you're gonna have to play into what is unique to it, and that is the Stab Body Press with Iron Defense combo. So this basically can play Ferrothorn's game, where instead of having the Fire type 4X, you have a Flying type 4X. But having Stab on Fighting is such a big deal for this kind of build, because that gives you so much more flexibility for your Terra type, while also giving you that Stab Body Press offense. Which Body Press setups are not that meta right now. There have been some Body Press Orthworms that get pretty far in tournaments, and sometimes win tournaments. I think an Orthworm team has won 2 tournaments so far since the start of Scarlet and Violet VGC. So even with Haze being on a lot of teams, you still can get away with Iron Defense Body Press builds. You just have to play around their control of it, which I believe Orthworm is a little bit better at playing around that because it is immune to Clear Smog, but this Pokemon gets Leech Seed, and it being a grass type is immune to Spore and Rage Powder from Amoonguss, so you can body press the target that you want to actually hit. And it also has a better protect move in the form of Spiky Shield. So in a way, this is actually a better Ferrothorn, and it feels really weird for me to say that, because Chesnaught's always been kind of mediocre, doesn't really have a point. But in this gen, it has a considerable buff to its moveset that I think makes it very viable as maybe not a meta pick, but as an off-meta / counter pick Pokemon. I definitely could see it being one of those B tiers that you don't really run across very often, but when you do, it's like, oh my goodness, I have to deal with that thing. Actually, it could deal with Dondozo quite well now thinking about it, considering how it resists Earthquake and Wave Crash, while also just being able to buff right in front of its face and get additional chip damage with Spiky Shield. I think this Pokemon really has a point. Obviously, the popular Paradox forms are going to give this a hard time. I imagine Fluttermane just one-hits it. But if you do run it bulletproof, it is immune to Shadow Ball, so that is something you can play into. But I do see the potential here for possibly the strongest body press build that we have seen in some time. But we'll have to wait and see if it has any good synergies that can help set it up. That's really where we find out if it's actually viable or not. Because it's one thing to have good options on its own, but if it doesn't synergize well with a consistent team, it's still not going to be used that often and may also still not actually be that good. But I see potential, and I think this is a Pokemon worth considering whenever it does become legal in VGC. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time.